She may not have an opinion because she's been doing more important things.
I feel like that's generally what our show...
Yeah.
It's like, we shouldn't have these opinions because we've been doing more important things, but here we are.
You're listening to Dots, Lines, and Destinations, a travel podcast, with hosts Stephen Seagraves, Fosma Moon, and Seth Miller.
It's episode 344 of Dots, Lines, and Destinations. I'm Stephen Seagraves, today joined by Seth Miller and special guest Caroline Lupini, a digital nomad. Hey, Caroline.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. We want to talk about one main subject that's, I think, near and dear to your heart, and something that you just recently accomplished. It's Fly 49 States. Can you tell us just a little bit about it and why you chose to pursue this?
Yeah, so normally I spend a lot of time traveling outside of the U.S., but over the past year and a half with the pandemic, that hasn't looked quite as it usually does for me and for most of us, I imagine. So I was talking to one of my friends one day who's a flight instructor, and I've always wanted to get my pilot's license, and he kind of just threw out this idea to me, just kind of as a little, challenge, that was look at all, the countries in the world and try to plan a route that would theoretically be possible to fly an electric aircraft someday. So we were looking at, 100 to 200 mile leg maximum and just see what we could make happen. And that slowly morphed into, well, what about flying to all of the U.S. states? And since I've always wanted to get my pilot's license, what if we do my training while we're flying to all of the states? And Hawaii got eliminated because it's a little bit hard to get there in a Cessna 172. The range isn't quite what we needed it to be, but we optimized a route.
You just hang a couple dozen fuel tanks off the wings, it'd be fine.
Yeah, people do that. People put fuel in the whole cabin area essentially and remove all of the seats and all of the extra weight, and it's super dangerous because the center of gravity and the weight imbalance is just not what it's supposed to be for that type of aircraft, and people die all the time trying to do that while they're ferrying planes to Hawaii, and I think even to Asia. So we did not do that. Didn't seem like a great idea. I don't know if it would have even been possible to have a second person in there, but 49 contiguous United States 49 continental United States was possible. We did have to land in Canada in order to make Alaska happen, but we optimized a route to be the fastest way to travel through all of the states, landing in each one. And we attempted to and succeeded in breaking the current world record, which was about 16 and a half days for the lower 48 states. There isn't an official record for the 49 states.
So, and that record is you land, you don't have to spend any time. It's basically doing the whole trip, right? To all 48 right. States. And
Yeah. We just had to land in each state. And we were able to complete the trip from Montana, which is where we started the lower 48, all the way to Maine in just short of 12 days. And then Alaska was 2 extra days, but again, not part of the official record. And we actually completed 2 landings in each state so that he could have one landing and I could have one landing, even though that wasn't a requirement by any stretch.
Oh, that's cool.
Was it like a touch and go and then you looped around and went back in again, or stopped and did something? And
pretty much. Usually one was a touch and go and then one was a full stop, and we refueled in a lot of states. And sometimes we would do the touch and go on the way in, and sometimes we would do it on the way out, and sometimes we knew we were going to have to stop again in the same state, so we would just do a touch and go and then go on and do a full stop at the next airport. It just depended a little bit on the situation.
And I mean, I have a few comments on this. I think I'm disappointed that I didn't hear you, traverse Newark, JFK, and LaGuardia as part of this as well. But
a little too late in the pandemic, I guess.
Yes. Traffic is back too far back. So, what was the reason to break a record, or was the reason to get your pilot's license, or was there a tertiary reason, or was this just something fun to do because it's pandemic and you can work from wherever and this is what you wanted to do?
A bit of all of the above. Definitely getting my pilot's license or completing a lot of the training and requirements in order to eventually get my pilot's license was a primary goal. It's something I've wanted to do since I did a discovery flight back in 2009 as a Christmas gift from one of my friends. But, in college, I didn't have a lot of money or really free time. And then after I started traveling a lot. And so I just wasn't in the States enough. We also wanted to promote women in aviation, because not that many pilots are women. It's depending on which category of pilot you're looking at, it's anywhere between about 5 and 7%. And that's like an incredibly low number. We always talk about all of these other fields where there aren't very many women, like engineering and, computer science and all of these other fields where we don't see that many women, but it's not even anywhere close to the same level as in aviation. And, I don't really know why that is. And also we see there's a huge fall off in the number of women who are student pilots who then go on to actually get their private pilot certificate. If I remember correctly, I think about 13% of student pilots are women, which is still a really low number, but it's a lot more than, 6%. And then also, we figured while we were researching this project, we came across these records that have been set. And so we were like, oh, we could, that would be fun if we can also break the record. But that was really not one of the initial goals. And honestly, the way Guinness handles their whole record system is kind of shenanigans, as we found out throughout the process. You have to submit an application to Guinness before they'll even tell you what evidence they require, and it takes them up to 3 months to respond with the list of evidence that they require. And we didn't know we were doing this 3 months ahead of time, so we were just like, okay, well, we'll submit the application and we'll just collect what we think they'll require, and maybe they'll accept our record attempt. But we did just literally last week get a response from Guinness about what they required, and we didn't quite do the things that they wanted, but we might be able to kind of pull together something that will work. However, one of the requirements is actually that the pilots have a private pilot certificate. So that alone may disqualify me from officially holding the Guinness World Record for this, even though it wouldn't disqualify my CFI.
Wow. Yeah. So it's like because you don't have, that's such a technicality.
It is a technicality, but at the same time, you can't be Guinness and be accused of trying to, induce someone to break the law by breaking this rule, even though they can't legally fly on their own.
Yeah,
I can almost understand where they're coming from there. Lawyers got involved, obviously.
Yeah. So
but that still sucks.
We're still going to submit everything and see what happens, but even if the record isn't officially recognized by them, it doesn't really matter, because we know that we did it and we have all of the proof. We took photos with airport signs and the geolocations, and I have my swarm check-ins everywhere, and I use this app to track my travel that pings the GPS satellites and puts a point on a map every 10 minutes. And so we have lots of evidence that we actually completed this, and we know that we did. So if Guinness doesn't officially recognize it, it doesn't matter. And plus it was just fun, especially after a whole year of, year plus of not really traveling, being able to do something really unique. And I had never been to Alaska, so that was the first state that we went to as part of this trip. And that was just the most ridiculously beautiful part of the whole trip. It was such an incredible experience to fly at low altitudes over near the Inside Passage all the way up to Ketchikan. It was just ridiculous. It reminded me why I love traveling so much.
Did you what time did you do the Alaska trip? What part of the year? What time of the year?
So we rented the plane out of San Diego, I believe at the beginning of May, and we headed up to Northern California, where we just hung out for about 2.5 weeks. And because we had to wait for a weather window to be able to do this, we did the whole record part of the attempt VFR. And in the spring, the Alaska weather isn't exactly great yet. So we actually really lucked out, because we were waiting for a good weather window for about a week and a half by the time we actually left. And we got a 2-day weather window where we flew up to Alaska one day and we flew back the next day. And if we had stayed longer in Alaska, we would have been stuck there for at least a week, because the weather window just completely shut down. So we got super lucky.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering, because, I'm thinking Ketchikan and Juneau. Even some of the commercial airliners have trouble at those spots during the spring. So, and you said you landed in Canada. Did you have to deal with COVID or anything like that?
Yes.
Checks or anything?
Yes, it was a mess. We had to land in both directions for fuel, and it was one of those things where we tried to do as much research ahead of time, and we thought we had all of the information that we needed. And then when we got on the phone the day of to get the approval for the flight, all of the information we got from every person we talked to was different, not only than the information that we had researched online, but also than the information that every other person had given to us on the phone that day. So I think we finally, Chauncey did all of the talking on the phone, since as a student pilot, I'm not allowed really to fly in Canada. Like, he had to be the pilot in command on those flights. So he knows a lot more than I do, especially at that point, because that was really only about 3 weeks into my training. So I think we finally just kind of reached a point where we were like, okay, well, we think this is probably going to work. We're just going to go, and worst case scenario, like, we're going to get in a little bit of trouble when we land. But when we
or shoved into a hotel room and, like, you never know, maybe you don't get to leave for 2 weeks, but hey, that's just a little trouble, right?
Yeah. So when I mean, really, like, even originally what they told us on the phone was that we weren't allowed to get out of the aircraft at all. We could not get out of the aircraft to go to the bathroom. We could only land places where somebody could fuel for us, and we both had to stay in the aircraft at all times. Then eventually we were told actually only one person is allowed to get out of the aircraft to do the fueling. The other person must stay in the aircraft at all times. Again, no bathroom breaks even, which was going to be very interesting. And then when we actually got to Canada, the first thing they told us was, okay, like, get out of the aircraft and meet the 2 customs agents who are going to come meet you by the plane. And we had to fill out some Canada form of, we haven't been exposed to COVID and don't have COVID. COVID tests were not required. And after we talked to them, they were like, okay, you're good to go, land wherever you need to land to get fuel, and, have a good trip. But then... So after you cleared the first entry point that you were allowed to sort of go anywhere else in Canada you needed to on the way through? Right. So, and we're only supposed to land for fuel. And
okay, so it was explicitly a transit experience.
Right. Yes. Okay. Exactly. And then the next day, when we had to fly back through Canada to come back to the United States, we had to go through this whole shenanigans again, where we couldn't get the same answer from anybody. And even from the day prior, they were like, we don't know how you did that yesterday, because actually you do need a COVID test.
Gosh.
And there were only...
I mean, this reminds me of when I transited
that are
Europe
allowed
once. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say there were only certain airports that could be used as entry airports, which is typical, but because of COVID, that number of airports is reduced right now. So on the way back through, we wanted to land at Prince Rupert. That was like really the only airport within comfortable range of our aircraft that could be used as an entry airport. And they didn't have fuel there. But the only way an airport was allowed, because of COVID, to be used as an entry airport is for a technical stop, so for fuel. But because that airport didn't have fuel, we actually had to buy a 5-gallon gas can, fill it with fuel in Alaska, and then bring it with us to Canada and use it to put 5 gallons in our fuel tank when we landed in Prince Rupert, so that the stop would count as a technical stop.
It's like the most bizarre workaround I think I've heard.
And there, the customs agent actually didn't even meet us. We were given a phone number to call when we landed, so we called, and he was like, okay, here's your, like, temporary authorization number. Send me a picture of your, like, form that you filled out and where you're planning to land, and I'll text you later today with your permanent authorization number, and have a good trip. So we never even met a person there.
So you just landed, put the 5 gallons in, got back in, and took off?
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
The transit thing reminds me a little bit of, I had a transit in Europe once where I went in through Italy and out through Zurich, and the Italians didn't stamp me in, and so the officers in Zurich were, like, flipping through my passport 3 times, and it had I had extra pages in it. I'm like, are you looking for the entry stamp? And the guy said, yes. And I was like, there isn't one. I came in through Rome. And he's like, oh, the Italians. And he tossed my passport back. He didn't stamp me out. Because at that point, he didn't want to get involved in this little shenanigans, right? But, like, the different rules and the different, like, you never know what you're going to get thing. It feels like very shrug your shoulders and hope for the best, eh?
Mm-hmm.
Which is
I think the
super
best part
surprising during COVID, though. Like, that the rules are that variable.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think it's probably just because they're not really dealing with that many people doing that. Like, how many people have flown, a small aircraft between the U.S. and Alaska over the past 18 months? Like, how how often are they even having to answer those questions? And assuming it's not very often, it's kind of no wonder that they don't really have a good protocol in place for what's supposed to happen.
Yeah, like most of the bush pilots are up there being bush pilots, right? They're not going up to Canada or to Alaska to be bush pilots, right? So,
right.
Yeah, that's wild. So then tell me a little bit about the planning for the lower 48, because, right, if you VFR, so it's visual flight rules for our listeners who may not be up to speed. So this means you can't be in clouds. You know, there's different rules around what's VFR and what's IFR. And so you're having to plan around weather and winds. And so what went into that? Like how much planning went into each, like into the whole trip, I guess? And then at each stop, were you guys having to kind of tweak things to better plan the route or, you know, sometimes improvise?
So in terms of the pre-trip planning, we kind of, there's that article that was written years ago about the most optimized route to drive through all of the states. So we kind of use that as our baseline route, and then tried to just choose airports that were at the edges and corners of states and optimize along, you know, the straight lines so we're not flying out of the way unnecessarily. And we just kind of played around with the route for about probably 4 weeks before the trip and just, you know, could we shave off a few miles there, a few miles there. But we finally got to the point where we were like, you know, at this point, these few miles aren't going to be what makes the difference on our trip. And then so our trip, the 48 states started in Montana, and then it came back west a bit and kind of down south to New Mexico, and then up to North Dakota, and then back down south to Florida, and then back up to Maine.
Wow.
But we just, again, caught the edges of states. Like, we weren't trying to hit any major cities. We were actually, we landed at very few tower-controlled airports for the whole trip, just because we wanted to keep it as fast as possible. And then I also had a whole document of, you know, at each airport, what's the nearest hotel, what's the nearest food, so that we could try to also optimize where should we stop tonight to sleep and where will we have access to food. And so that's kind of what happened up until we got to Colorado. We had really good weather. We left midday from Montana, and we stayed one night in California, and then we stayed one night in southern Colorado, and then we made it to Colorado Springs, which is where we had planned to have some maintenance done on our aircraft because it was ready for an oil change. Unfortunately, during the oil change, the mechanic discovered a bunch of metal shavings in the oil filter, which... is not what's supposed to happen. And so we followed the manufacturer's recommendations and flew the plane for 2 hours. We flew an hour up north to stay with some friends of mine and then back to Colorado Springs. They cut open the oil filter again to see if that was just a, you know, one-time fluke, like something weird had happened and there was some metal, or if it was some bigger issue. And there was, just from 2 hours of flying, quite a bit of metal in the oil filter. So we had to get a hold of the owner of the aircraft, who was based in San Diego, and ended up deciding that we shouldn't fly that aircraft for the rest of the trip because it was only going to get farther away from its home base. And so Chauncey actually flew that aircraft back to San Diego. It was deemed safe enough to do that by the mechanic. And luckily, that flight school where we had used the mechanic had a plane that had just come back online that no one was really renting yet. And the owner of the flight school cut us a deal so that we were able to finish the trip. So we did the second half of the trip in a different aircraft.
Wow.
Yeah.
But you still managed to get it back and get a new one and get back to Colorado, and you still managed to finish everything in 12 days?
Yeah, so
So how bad were the people that did this? Sorry, not to belittle your efforts, and I know you put a lot into this, but come on.
So it's even crazier than that, actually, because the reason why Chauncey had time to fly it back to California and then come back to Colorado is because the new aircraft was about 3 hours away from needing its 100-hour inspection, which is an inspection that's required for aircraft that's used to carry passengers or to teach out of. And that inspection takes like 2 to 3 days of full-time work to complete. And I think this was like on a Wednesday or Thursday that Chauncey flew the plane back. Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, the weather was horrible anyway, so we weren't going to be able to get out of Colorado then. And then they started the 100-hour on Monday, and I think finished it Wednesday morning. And so we were finally able to leave Wednesday afternoon. So we were actually in Colorado for a full week because of this delay. So if it hadn't been for that, we would have broken the record by a lot more, but we also would have done the second half in a slightly more leisurely fashion. Like, the first half, we actually slept in hotels and ate real food. The second half, we slept on couches in FBOs for a few hours at a time and ate, I don't even know what, honestly.
Wait. I just want to say, sleeping in FBOs and in eating, hot ramen, out of a cup, like cup noodles or something, sounds like it's like Seth's perfect way of traveling. the FBO is like a hostel.
Exactly, yeah.
I'm trying to decide whether I should be proud or offended at this comment, and I'm really not sure which. Actually, the one question I have, though, is if you're flying under VFR, that means daylight flights only, right?
You can fly VFR at night.
Oh, you can?
And we did fly a lot at night. The whole trip from leaving San Diego until we returned with the new plane to Colorado, we did around, I think, 140 hours. And of that, I believe about 30 hours were at night. So we flew quite a bit at night. And that includes, flying back from Maine. We stopped in Michigan for a few days to hang out with my parents who live here. And then we flew back to Colorado. But I like flying at night because the air is a lot smoother. Mm. And so it's just very chill. There aren't so many other airplanes out. And so I always thought the flying at night was great. And plus, I'm not a morning person, so staying up late was way easier than getting up early, though we did have to get up early a lot also.
I love that. Like, well, I don't like to get up early, so let's just fly at night because we can, and the weather's good.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm thinking there's a... I think we're going to talk about it a little later, but a new seaplane thing starting, and they said they don't fly at night because of VFR rules. I don't know if that's seaplanes or...
I think I don't know if it's the VFR rules, but I think it might have something to do with the landing on the water, because I don't know if they can have lights. I mean, I guess there's probably some way that they could have a lighted runway on the water, but I don't really know how that works because I don't know how seaplanes work. But that's my guess, is it has...
Yeah, no, that makes sense. It has to be a lighted runway, and you can't light up the ocean unless, I mean, you could, but that would be a terrible thing to do. So
yeah,
I mean, there was that oil rig thing. Yeah, they could hire them.
the one where the Gulf of Mexico is on fire. That probably wasn't for flight guidance.
I was trying to think of some other questions I had. I mean, there's tons of questions. I could talk about this all day because I think it's fascinating. Like with VFR rules, right? Where you guys were having to kind of dodge weather as well. I'm guessing as you were going between airports. Did you run into a lot of weather? I mean, you're early enough in the season where there probably weren't a lot of thunderstorms, but did you have some incidents of that?
We got pretty lucky. I mean, when we were stuck in Colorado for those couple of days, there was some bad weather, but we didn't have a plane then anyway, so it didn't matter. I think I think really the whole second half of the trip was pretty smooth from the weather front. When we left Maine, we did have to wait until late afternoon. We were hoping to be able to leave late morning, and there was weather, so we couldn't leave from Maine as soon as we wanted. And then that meant that we were hoping to fly all the way to Michigan in one day, but we ended up spending the night in Niagara Falls, New York, and then finishing the flight back in the morning. And then we did actually, on our last leg into Colorado, pick up an IFR flight plan in the air because we were really close to our destination and there were just a few clouds and we didn't have enough fuel to be able to go around the clouds. And we just were ready to get there at that point.
You're ready to be done. Yeah. I'm looking at the flight path on fly49states.com that you put up, and it's funny because you're people are like, oh, when you fly to 49 states, right? You're gonna fly to the middle, but no, you're serious. You really just skirted the edges, right?
Yeah.
Idaho real quick from Montana, then down to Washington, Oregon, Northern California, into Nevada. And then touched Utah, Arizona, New Mexico, and then up and through Colorado. So it's the edge of the state, and it makes this an interesting. It's fascinating,
right? Yeah, and it's kind of crazy too. Like if you look at where we landed in Texas, it's way on the east part, and in my head, Texas doesn't even go that far east, but obviously it does. And that made a huge difference between our record attempt and the guys who held the record previously. Is their route wasn't optimized. They pretty much went across the north and then they came back across the south. So they started and ended their Fly 48 states trip in the same location, whereas we started ours in Montana and we ended in Maine.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, the sectional is actually really, I think the sectional is a great view of it. It's pretty cool. So what was the type of plane on the second half of the trip, the one that you picked up in Colorado?
It was also a Cessna 172, but it was an XP model, and it was actually really nice because it had an autopilot and it had a constant speed propeller.
So you didn't have to mess with the propeller variability or anything like that?
Right. And yeah, it gave me just some more insight into the different systems that exist on different planes. And they say that getting your private pilot certificate is a lesson to learn, is an invitation to learn more about aviation. And so it was just kind of cool to have an introduction to how different planes can be.
Yeah. Even
when they're both 172s.
I kind of love that you use Long Island for your New York stop. Like, there's this whole big other state out there, but whatever, we don't need that.
Well, she's going to Maine. Gotta optimize.
Sort of so you did like Long Island, Connecticut, Rhode Island, Connecticut, Vermont, New Hampshire, Maine?
Mm-hmm, exactly.
Sort of looped through there, yes. Yeah, that makes sense.
She was actually she was like by Marlborough, where she landed in New Hampshire. Out by Marlborough. I don't know how close that is to you, Seth.
No, it's the wrong side of New Hampshire for me. But
it's not a huge state.
Dude, if you surprised, Keene is like a 2.5 hour drive from me, which is hard to believe. There's no highways east-west here.
Gotcha.
That's the problem. You were much closer when you got to Maine. You should have called.
Yeah.
Next time.
Well, yeah, that had been our plan originally when we thought we were going to have more time, is I have, friends all over, and we did actually, one of my friends lives in Chicago and is a pilot and flew up to Wisconsin and met us for lunch that day. Oh, nice. But by that point of the trip, we were like, oh, we really have to go. And actually, it's kind of crazy because the helicopter record for the fastest to visit the 48 states is a little bit over 12 days. One guy did it in 12 days by himself. I don't know how, because the last bit of the trip, we were kind of like, we literally have to optimize every landing to be as fast as possible if we want to beat this helicopter record also. And so literally, after every landing, I'd be like, okay, so we have X number of states left. If we can keep our average time on the ground to under, Y number of minutes, then we're just barely going to break the record. And I don't know exactly how many hours and minutes this guy had. It was closer to 12 days than to 13 days. But we did, our final time for the 48 states was 11 days, 23 hours, and 53 minutes. So we were just barely under the 12-day kind of goal that was in our head when we finally rolled in.
Start calling ahead to FBOs and see who's got a NASCAR fuel can to fill the tanks faster.
Yeah.
This reminds me of Midnight Run. I don't know how familiar either of you are with the movie, but it reminds me of that. It's Robert De Niro.
Okay.
Or I would say Cannonball Run would be the version I'd go with, but that's much less serious.
Yes, much less serious. It was, it's an adventure.
Yeah. Oh, it definitely was.
And so through all of this, though, you also accrued a whole bunch of hours and enough to get close to your PPL?
Yeah. So I have way more hours than necessary. The minimum requirement is 40 hours, and at least 20 of those have to be instruction, and at least 10 have to be solo. I had none of my solo hours because neither of the aircraft were allowed to be soloed away from their home base, just in case something happened. It would be harder to fix it and more expensive to fix it.
Wouldn't typically a solo go back to where it started because you'd have to pick up Chauncey?
Well, right, exactly. So,
maybe I
wouldn't have wanted to pick him up.
See ya, buddy, I'm finishing this on my own.
So, and yeah, the national average for people completing their private pilot is 62 hours. So I had 135 hours before I even soloed.
Oh, wow.
Well, actually, I had 135 logged hours, but I actually couldn't log all of the hours of the trip because Chauncey's only allowed to give 8 hours of instruction per day. And there were days that we flew for over 8 hours. The highest number of hours we flew on any one calendar day was 14 hours. So I had 6 hours that I couldn't even log that day.
So you have soloed now?
I have soloed now.
We were talking about this when you were in Portland. You hadn't soloed yet.
I hadn't soloed yet, and I was terrified.
And how did it go?
It went a lot better than I kind of expected it to, but I don't know how people solo for the first time after like 10 to 15 hours of instruction.
Just because it's like it's a lot going on, right? Like,
and like I still don't know anything, but I definitely didn't know anything then.
I mean, you went and you came back, so it seems like you know a couple things.
Yeah.
Let's give you a little credit here.
Yeah. I did have a moment after my wheels were off the ground where I was like, okay, I've really done it now.
And does that require you to solo cross country, or is it just a solo, just kind of fly around for that many hours and you can come back to the same airport, or do you have to cross country as part of that solo?
So 10 solo hours are required, and 5 of those must be cross-country. And what's considered cross-country in aviation terms is any flight that's more than 50 nautical miles from the departure point. So I did my solo cross-country last Sunday. It's typical for people to break it up into 2 separate flights, like a shorter solo cross-country and a longer solo cross-country. But I wanted to go have lunch with a friend, and I did my solo cross-country in a Cessna 150, which is a slower plane than a 172. And so I knew based on my flight plan that I was going to be really close to 5 hours. So I just flew around a little bit extra at the end to kick over 5 hours. And I did it all in one go since I feel much better about my cross-country flight planning and abilities than I do even still with landings. Like, I think that's still the harder part for me. Though my landings have also gotten a lot better, and I'm not afraid to fly by myself anymore.
Awesome. That's awesome. Does this mean you're going to go buy a Cirrus now, SR-22? And that's going to be because you need something a little higher speed.
Yeah, maybe someday. I actually do think if I decided that if after I go back and travel internationally again, if I decide that, because I'm a little bit intimidated to go back to my previous life of full-time travel just because the world is very different, and I haven't traveled internationally in a long time, and I haven't been to a non-Spanish speaking country in even longer. And so I'm like, how did I used to do that all the time? And so my backup plan, if I don't like that anymore, which I'm sure is not going to actually be the case, but, just in case to have a backup plan, is to buy a plane, but probably not a Cirrus, probably something cheaper, and just fly around the country for a while.
Hey. I like it. I like that plan.
I kind of feel like both could work.
Yeah,
both would work, except for planes are expensive.
Yeah,
it's like a boat. You want the
someone else to have one.
Yeah,
it's like, can I borrow your plane? Yeah, sure, okay. So are you cool with jumping into some news topics, or Seth? Did you have other questions? Or
no, I remain amazed. That you sort of did this, I'll say, rookie sort of in training. It seems like both an incredibly wonderful way to do it, but also, I would imagine, more stressful just because the extra planning involved. So very impressed. Right? It's not just doing loops at the local airport.
Yeah, I tend to enjoy drinking from the fire hose, so.
I would say that's an understatement in this case.
Yeah, it's pretty in character.
Yeah.
So... yeah, we were talking about seaplanes earlier. There's an airline that I think it's called Tailwind that wants to start New York City to Boston seaplane flights. Yeah,
I'm really torn on it. I think it's super interesting, obviously. I think everything we talk about is. But they are going to fly from 23rd Street, Manhattan on the East River to Boston Harbor. And they do it on a caravan with 8 seats on board, so it's executive style seating, light, very light loaded. Your ticket comes with a 20-pound baggage allowance. So I'm thinking about, okay, I could take this to get to Boston on the way to New York on the way to London in a couple weeks. Am I going to be able to pack my suitcase down to 20 pounds for that trip? That would be weird. I guess only one pair of shoes, certainly, at that point. But then it's, right, like, they literally are landing in the middle of Boston Harbor, and they take, their dock is like, there's, I guess the plane stays out in the harbor, and they bring a boat out and ferry you to the pier in downtown Boston. So that part of it seems pretty cool.
That's fun.
Yeah, it's their goal is to make it so that you can truly do out and back for a meeting in either city, downtown in a day without dipping into.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's cool.
You have to work the meetings without having to worry about transit time to the airport and security lines and needing to be at the airport X hours early because of all that stuff.
Yeah, and when we say Boston Harbor, I mean, forgive my lack of 1776 knowledge here, but is that like just southwest of the airport? Because I mean, there's a lot of water around Boston.
Yeah, you land. So they put an X on the map, and it's basically just off the edge of Logan. And you and then they ferry you south though from there, so you don't go up to Logan. You go down to land on the other side.
Gotcha. Okay.
And what's interesting about that in some ways to me is, like, how do you integrate seaplanes into the rest of the operations at Logan? And I know from a seaplane operator friend in Fort Lauderdale that basically when it's that close to the real airport, they'll basically shoot the approach as though they are going to a regular runway and then just dip off to the side and land in the water instead. Which is, like, from an operational perspective, super crazy.
So they would like shoot the approach for, what is that, like 3-2 at the south side of Logan, and then just land in the water.
I imagine they do like 927, right? The straight east-west runway.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Get in line basically with, because most of the big planes most often they use 422, right? The sort of northeast-southwest approach, and that's where the big planes go. But I think Cape Air does plenty of the short runway stuff. And these guys could, with the cross run, and these guys could do that too and just drop right in.
So. What do you think, Caroline? Would you do this?
I mean, I would definitely do it. I think it would be an awesome way. I mean, maybe someday. I have a ways to go. I'll just start working on my seaplane rating next. I'll just fly around, the circumference of the United States.
There you go.
Yeah, I think it sounds cool, but I don't know if it's really that helpful for business travelers. And then again, I'm not based on the East Coast. I've never been a business traveler, so who knows what they actually want. But I just think that those flights will not be as reliable as commercial flights because of the weather. They won't be as reliable as Amtrak.
Yeah.
Because of the weather.
That's my concern too. But
they're still on a limited schedule. I think they're doing 4 flights per day? And they can only be during daylight hours and only during certain times of the year. And so, I mean, I guess they think there's a big enough market to have launched the flights. But I would just like to do it because I like taking weird routes and trying new airlines and doing different things. And so definitely next time I'm in the area at the right time of the year, that's going to be something I want to do just for fun. If I have under 20 pounds of luggage, which is never.
So here's the real question, right? How do you log this into flight memory or something?
It has IATA codes.
Both stops?
Yeah.
I didn't realize East 23rd Street had an IATA code. You're looking it up right now, aren't you? This is what we need a producer for.
I am. I'm trying to
Speaking
get to it.
Of flight memory,
it's in the notes. So
I am logging my whole Fly 49 States trip in flight memory as well. But a lot of the airports aren't in the database, and so I have to manually add them using the latitude and longitude, and it's taking a really long time.
Oh yeah, because I bet they're like most of them are like 9S codes or Yeah.
Exactly. So maybe in like another couple of years, I'll finally be done with that part of the project.
Oh, that's a pain.
Yeah.
Because I used to fly. I mean, I used to work right off East 16th Street in New York, and I could actually see the East 23rd. Like there are other seaplanes out of East 23rd, and I would watch them take off and land.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So East 23rd Street is NYS. Yeah, NYS for New York something. I don't know, New York Skyport. There you go. And Boston Harbor is BNH.
Oh. Nice. Yeah.
So who knows if any of the systems actually have, if those flight memories or whatever have those entered because, whatever. But gonna try.
Yeah. Let's talk about Malaysian Airlines. They are somehow finally getting around to trying to sell their A380s. I didn't say they did sell them. They're trying to sell them.
Yeah, there's a tender offer out, right? So it's like, hey, does anybody want these? Because they finally have decided, like, right, they used them for London service for a while, so whatever. And then that was not working. And then they tried to use them as sort of charter operations for pilgrimage to Saudi Arabia. And these days, that's mostly done. Although there's a little bit of that coming back. Saudi is starting to sell tickets. I saw an advertisement just before we started recording that you can apply for your permit for the Umrah pilgrimage now again when you buy your plane ticket. So that some of that's coming back, but obviously not quite in the same volumes as it used to be. And I mean, everybody. The problem for Malaysia Airlines is. The problems are plentiful, but at this point, the main situation, everybody's getting rid of their 380s. So it's not like it's a suddenly, they have something unique or special here to offer. So I think I give a sort of nod to our last episode where we said we were going to buy out the Alitalia brand. Jason and Ian over at Flight Radar said they were going to do the same thing and apparently went a step further than us and actually used Malaysia Airlines A380 as their flagship aircraft. So if they get it, I guess that's where we're going.
Okay. I mean, so let's talk about which airlines are getting rid of them. So, BA is, are they done with their A380s? Or are they going to bring them?
No, they're keeping. They're keeping for now.
Okay. Lufthansa.
I thought was done, but I could be wrong.
I think they're done.
Yeah.
Qantas.
Qatar Airways is done. Qantas is keeping.
Okay.
China Southern is keeping. Korean, I'm not sure. Emirates is keeping. Etihad is dumping. Who else?
ANA.
Keeping for now, I think. They only had the 3. Air France, I don't remember.
Thai?
Oh, yeah, Thai.
Yeah. It's a mirror. They're still in business. That's kind of amazing. Yeah, I'd have to do more research.
There's a lot of A380s out there that potentially, just from Etihad and Qatar getting rid of theirs, right? That's quite a few.
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing. The demand for the type was 0 anyways, even pre-COVID. So, and now with long haul, hub-to-hub international traffic going to be several years towards recovery. Mm-hmm. I mean, even Highfly got rid of the one that with the former Singapore one that they had leased and were operating randomly.
With all of the Newark issues, maybe United should buy some of these or lease them and fly them point to point.
Baton Rouge?
Yeah, Baton Rouge, or Florida. And some of their Florida routes, I could see that working. Just stuff those things full of tourists going to Orlando and beat Allegiant out on price.
Well, and then think about how many people would get kicked off of those flights for not wearing their masks properly.
I love that that's immediately where your mind went. Oh, man. So, yeah, I mean, you could do that. Think about that. I mean, you can't operate the A380 at Newark, but it's fun to think about.
Is Newark not capable?
I don't think so. Taxiway problems next to the runway. United has JFK slots. JFK LAX isn't doing great.
Throw an A380 on it though, baby, and watch the passengers show up.
Yeah, I mean, you'd end up on the blogosphere. It'd be great.
You're gonna kill me. Avatar. Screw the 747s. Go for the 380s instead.
Theoretical airlines getting theoretical planes. I love it.
Avatar, Baltia merge. Grab these used 380s, and who knows what comes next.
Oh, man. Yeah.
I'm not even drunk, and I came up with that.
Yeah, I mean, that is kind of off the wall a little bit. I mean, I think it's. I mean, let's be serious here, right? Like, Hawaii is another spot where the A380s could actually help the airlines. It wouldn't help Hawaii, but it would help the airlines. Well,
but that's where That's where ANA flies them. I mean,
I know, but I'm saying domestically they could do it now, right?
Yeah, there's such demand.
Yeah, you should see. It's like a constant line of airplanes going to Hawaii from the mainland. Yeah. Constant. Just cut that in half. Put an A380 on it.
Or you got enough A380s, just keep dumping people in. There already were no rental cars. There's soon there going to be no U-Hauls either.
It's bus service to Hawaii. I love it.
Yeah.
Cruise ships. Let's talk about these. So there was a lawsuit, right, in Florida?
So CDC had a rule that said if cruises want to operate, they have to confirm that passengers are all fully vaccinated. And the state of Florida sued, and the 11th Circuit Court upheld the CDC ruling, and then 3 days later, with no notice or unclear reasoning, just issued a new ruling that was 100% the opposite. So that alone, like the circumstances around that alone are bizarre and raise lots of eyebrows. But the current situation is that cruises can operate without requiring proof of vaccination. However, and Disney is, I think, going to be first to get back into service. But because they're not doing proof of vaccination, the CDC is treating them like other modes of conveyance, which means that at least through September 13th, if you're indoors, masking is required. So
does that just apply to the cruises leaving from Florida, or does that apply to all cruises in the U.S.?
I think it's probably all, because the ruling it's a federal rule and it's a federal court.
Okay.
But I guess like the cruise ships, I think can ask, and right now it's, if the Disney policy is essentially they're asking everybody, if you provide proof of vaccination, then you don't have to take a test. If you don't, you have to test at home some number of days, 72 hours out, and at the port of embarkation, and should show 2 negative tests to get on board. So they're trying in some ways, but what's a little surprising to me is, and I guess I shouldn't be that surprised for a variety of reasons, but that the companies are willing to say, we'd rather take people who are testing negative and force masking indoors throughout the cruise ship than say, no, even though we don't have to, we're still going to ask everybody to be vaccinated on board.
Mm-hmm.
That's the part that's surprising to me. It's because it requires the masking that everybody hates. But I guess they've looked at who the people are buying the cruises and decided that those people are less likely to be vaccinated and more likely to be willing to wear the masks or pretend to.
I mean, the disturbing part to me is the flip on the decision, right? Like,
it is very weird.
Why the change? I think it's a good thing that they're just saying, okay, well then just everyone has to mask because of this conveyance rule. Like if that's the rule, then that's fine. I think that's probably at this point what we're seeing in Florida and Alabama and Arkansas. I think it's okay to say you have to wear a mask now because clearly it ain't working for vaccination wise. So yeah, I don't know.
Also, like that, the mask rule currently only applies through September 13th.
Yeah, we're only 2 months away, or a month and a half away, really.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's it for a show. I mean, I think that was a solid hour of awesome content. I mean, I'm kind of biased, but that's me.
It's okay. We'll give it to you.
Yeah, Caroline. Anything else you wanna talk about, or are you good?
Oh no, I'm good. This was super fun though.
Sweet. Well, a big thank you to Caroline for coming on the show. Fly49states.com is where they can find you. Twitter or Instagram what do you prefer? How do people find you online, Caroline?
So, Fly49States has an Instagram with some photos from our trip. It's at Fly49States. And then I'm on Twitter at Caroline Lupini. That's Lupini for the last name.
Awesome. And you can follow the podcast on Twitter at DotsLines, moredotsmorelines.com. Thanks for listening. We're going to have a little bit of a bonus topic, talking about some Eurowing stuff for our Patreon subscribers. And, that comes up right after this. So thanks for listening and, see you next time. Bye-bye.